Hi guys! So I have a PowerPoint for you today, and this is just going to help get you in the mindset of getting ready for the upcoming research paper, which I know you guys are very excited about. So I'm going to start with some writing tips. And these are things that you've heard me say over the past several weeks, but I think it's worth repeating, especially now that you have finished your exploratory essay and hopefully you've read my comments. But I thought I would address some of these issues in this presentation. Okay, so first and foremost, you want to avoid wordy, bloated phrases. Okay, so remember we talked in class about that feeling like when you eat too much, you get really bloated and you just feel like yuck, right? So we don't want our audience to look at our writing and be like yuck, right? Like there's just too much there. There's too many words, it's hard to read through, it's hard to get to the main point. So a general rule of thumb is that if you can say it in less words, then please do. So let's look at a wordy example here. This sentence, which I'll read to you, says, Joanna Smith, excuse me, is a writer for the New York Times, and she wrote an article that talks about how nowadays there are more and more college students who are suffering from depression. Okay, so this is like so cringy. Let's unpack this together. So, Joanna Smith is a writer for the New York Times. Okay, there's nothing like super wrong with that, but we could condense that and express it more concisely. She wrote an article that talks about. Okay, so let's stop right there. If you recall me saying in class that I want you to get out of the habit of saying that so and so talks about blah blah blah. Let's think of a better, more academic, more sophisticated way to express the same thing. So what could we say instead? She discusses, or she reveals, or she highlights, or she demonstrates. There are a number of words you could use to express the same things, and that, just gives your audience the impression that you are a polished academic writer. Okay, so she wrote an article that talks about how nowadays, okay, so pet peeve number like 62, please avoid this word nowadays. Every single college student likes to use this in every single essay, and I am just getting irritated with it. Okay, so we're not going to say nowadays, right? We're going to think of a better way to express that. Or we could just leave it out altogether. It really depends on the context of your sentence. Okay, so nowadays there are more and more college students who are suffering from depression. Okay, so again, if you can say it in less words, do so. So here's a revised version. This is a better version. Maybe not the best version we could come up with, but it's a better one. New York Times writer Joanna Smith reveals a significant increase in students suffering from depression. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. And then this leads to my next slide, which is about transition sentences. Now this should be a habit at this point. We've talked in class about the importance of transition sentences because if you think about your audience doesn't know really what your plan is for your essay. You will have a thesis statement and you will have a main idea that you will be arguing, but your reader might not necessarily know all the different parts that are going to be included in your essay. So this is where transition sentences become really important. They act as road signs, signposts, or whatever else you can think of that will guide your reader through the journey that is your paper. So if one paragraph is writing about all the toxic chemicals that are dumped into the river as a result of clothing manufacturing companies in Bangladesh, and then your next paragraph shifts to discussing workers' rights and the human rights abuses of the workers in those companies. Well, you need to bridge those two, right? You don't want to abruptly shift from one topic to another without including a transition sentence or road sign or a signpost that tells your reader where you're going, right? None of us like to get lost. How many of you have ever gotten lost while you were driving somewhere? It's not a good feeling. So we don't want our audience to feel lost while they are reading our papers. So we're going to provide those transition sentences for them so that there's a smooth and logical flow to your ideas. All right, so another very important point. Attribute your sources, right? What does that mean? Attribute your sources. Make sure that you indicate where any outside ideas are coming from, right? And not just that, but then follow up those outside ideas with your own analysis and explanation. So if you're presenting information, you need to tell your reader, well, who said this? Why did they say it? And what does it mean? We've talked about how we don't want to use quoted information without following up with an explanation. And you definitely don't want to end a paragraph with quoted information, because it's your job to explain what that quote means, how it's relevant to your argument, and to connect all of those dots for your reader. So here's a sentence that is not attributed and is poorly written and is another like cringe-worthy sentence. So I'll read it to you. It says, "It is known that most people don't think about where their clothes were made." Okay, so first of all, this is written in the passive voice, which we know we're supposed to avoid as much as possible. Most people, that's vague, right? Let's talk about percentages if we can. Or if we're making a very general statement, that might be okay, but we want to be as specific as possible. It is known that most people don't think about where their clothes were made. Well, it says who, right? Was it a researcher who actually knows what he or she is talking about? Or was it like, Uncle Bob who lives next door who just came up with this idea and then now you're quoting it in your paper, right? Is Uncle Bob a reputable source? Maybe not. So yeah, we want to avoid those kinds of sentences. Always attribute your sources and explain how it's relevant to your argument. Okay, so now for this paper, which is the longest paper you will have written for this class, there's a requirement for 10 sources. And I will give you guys the specifications later on Blackboard. 5 will need to be scholarly sources, and then the other 5 can be other credible sources. But you're going to need 10 total. So in order to find 10 good sources that you feel are worthy of being included in your paper, you're probably going to be looking at more than 20, right? And it can be confusing if you're not keeping track of all of your sources and if you don't have a system to keep track of those sources. So on this next slide, I have a sample of like a page of notes that sorry, I'm looking at my dog. A page of notes that you might create while you are going through all these multiple sources, right? Because there's nothing worse than having read something that you thought was really good that you definitely want to include in your paper and then not writing down the necessary information and then later trying to find it and having no idea where it was and having to sift through like 29 open tabs on your browser, trying to figure out where that source is, where you saw it, what page it was on. So for each source you look at, I definitely recommend that you enter in the information in MLA format. Do this now so that you're not stuck trying to do the formatting for all 10 sources at once, because it is, tedious and, it can just be a pain. So I definitely recommend every source you look for, creating a works cited entry, and then including some notes under that entry that will be helpful to you later. So the goal is to streamline the process so that you're not spending hours and hours redoing work that you might have already done. So in this paragraph, you might include, where you found the source, what the main ideas were in the source, how you think the source will be useful for your paper, right? So that'll help you later as you get into the drafting stage. Okay, so lastly, here's some things to remember. You have a really important role in creating this researched argument. You are going to be giving back to a community of researchers that have written ideas and have compiled research and information that are going to be helpful to other people. So think of how many times you've looked up something on Google. You had a question and you wanted an answer and you typed it in the search bar and you got your answer really fast, right? Someone did that research. Someone went through the trouble of getting that information, publishing it, making it available so that anyone else could benefit from it. So think of yourself as also having that role. Your goal is to take this social problem that we're exploring and presenting a passionate argument about why it needs to be examined. You're going to talk about why you think your solution to this problem is valid and how your solution to this problem can improve things for society. And as I said last week, it is your job to demonstrate enthusiasm for your topic and to incite curiosity amongst your audience. You want to have the frame of mind that your audience does not necessarily know this information, but they need to know this information. Also, this quote that I really like, research is the world's biggest industry. Those who cannot do it well or evaluate that of others will find themselves sidelined in a world increasingly dependent on sound ideas based on good information produced by trustworthy inquiry and then presented clearly and accurately. So again, this is where you come in. You're going to be doing that research. You're going to be presenting an argument and presenting your information clearly and accurately. Last but not least, just remember that research takes time. We will have the remainder of the term to work on this paper, so about 6 weeks or so. So just please keep up with the deadlines as we will complete this in small stages. Remember that this is a marathon and not a sprint. We will all get to the finish line intact. And just let me know if you have any questions. All right, thanks.